در زمان پدر من زنهای ایران از توی پرده به اصطلاح حجاب، ولی به عقیده من از پرده غفلت و نیستی خارج شدند و در زندگی محدود اجتماعی، یعنی به خصوص در قسمت فرهنگ و بهداشت و بعضی مشاغل دیگر وارد شدند. که زن ایرانی شایستگی هر نوع آزادی و هر نوع امکانات پیشرفت اجتماعی.
Well, hello everyone. I'm Mehak Hazave, a Canadian lawyer and human rights activist, and on behalf of All for Iran team, I'm thrilled to be welcoming you to our first ever virtual panel discussion, a tribute to the brave women of Iran. While we meet today on a virtual platform, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. The theme of this year's International Women's Day is Embrace Equity. This theme focuses on the need to embrace equity as a fundamental principle for achieving gender equality and justice around the world. This theme is closely linked to the Women Life Freedom Movement, a grassroots movement led by Iranian women advocating for gender equality, freedom of choice, and an end to gender-based violence. The murder of Gina Mahsa Amini, a young Kurdish Iranian woman, on September 16, 2022, sparked the first women-led revolution, which saw men and women across the country rise up against the systematic oppression of the Islamic Republic to demand women's rights. After 6 months of protests in Iran, we have witnessed the killing of more than 70 children and over 530 women and men, as well as the imprisonment of more than 20,000 people in Iran. Since the start of this protest in September, news agencies and human rights organizations have reported numerous incidents of sexual and gender-based violence and sexual torture as a form of state terror in street, detention centers, and prisons, including rape, psychological and physical torture, and threats to the safety of the protester and their loved ones. Moreover, there have recently been chemical attacks on girls and young women in schools and universities, which have injured over 1,000 girls and resulted in numbers of deaths. Despite significant progress in women's rights globally, women in Iran continue to face systematic discrimination and inequality in various aspects of private and public life that aim to marginalize them and control their bodies and lives. Discriminatory laws and a non-exhaustive list of lack of rights limit women's access to education, employment, and other opportunities, reinforcing their second-class status. On this International Women's Day, we must remember the struggle that Iranian women and women around the world face in their fight for gender equality. The Government of Canada's theme for International Women's Day 2023 is Every Woman Counts. This is the reminder that all women from all ages and walks of life have a place in every aspect of Canadian society, including in the economic, social, and political spheres. We hope to bring Canada's attention to the fact that even in the current age of globalization, freedom is not a given and should be fiercely defended by all people around the world. Well, we will begin with a few brief housekeeping notes and will then move on to introduce and speak with our distinguished panelists, Azam Jangravi, woman rights advocate, Anita Vanderbilt, Member of Parliament and the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of International Development, Nazanin Afshinjan McKay, human rights activist, Jenna Saad, Member of Parliament and the Parliamentary Secretary to Minister for Women, Gender Equality and Youth, and Najmeh Tansaz, athlete and professional boxer. We are honored to have you all on this panel today. I would like to thank All for Iran team for organizing this event. This is an organization of Iranian Canadian citizens living in Ottawa who are fighting for a free Iran. I would also like to remind you that this event is being recorded on live stream. You can access the recording later through our website. And I will provide a short biography for each panelist, followed by 2 rounds of question and answers. Then we will take questions from the audience, followed by 3-minute closing remarks from each panelist. Finally, I will deliver the closing remarks. And also, I should remind you that a timer will be shown on the screen during the question and answer session and closing remarks, just to help us manage the time. So if you would like to submit your questions, please submit them via the Q&A feature on your webinar. Some of our audience, they have already submitted their questions and we have them, but if you are watching us right now, you have the option and you have the opportunity to ask any question that you want, and time permitting, we're gonna answer all the questions. So I would like to start our discussion with our first panelist. So Azam Jangrabi. Azam is an Iranian women's rights advocate. She holds a bachelor's degree in computer engineering and a master's degree in artificial intelligence from Iran. She worked as an IT director and public relations director at the Iranian Institute for Women's Study and Research. Azam is one of the girls of Enqilab Street during the Iranian protests against compulsory hijab, which led to her arrest. After moving to Canada in 2019, Azam has obtained a paralegal and international law certificate and is working as a cybersecurity analyst and digital security trainer. And she's an active human rights advocate. Well, welcome, Azam. Happy to have you with us today.
Hello, everyone.
Okay, I know.
I am.
Go ahead, please. Yes, we hear you perfectly.
I am honored to be here with you. Let me.
I know that you are in Germany right now. You are not even in Canada, and I understand that it's very late in Germany. Thank you for being here, and we're going to start with the first round of question. Everyone knows that you are one of the, Enqilab Street girls, and it's very important for us to know about your journey. So you were one of the...
I can't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now? Can you hear anyone? Let's try.
Just a minute. Can you hear me right now?
Yes, I hear you perfectly. This is the...
I can hear you. Okay, sorry about that.
Perfect, good. So I was saying that you were one of the first women to participate in the Girls of Enqilab Street protest. And I just want to know what motivated you to join this movement against the compulsory hijab? And also, can you describe your experience of being arrested and detained after protesting?
Let me begin with how I became who I am today. I was born in a religious and traditional family. After I got married, I wasn't allowed to laugh out loud or even express myself. My ex-husband made all the decisions for me. Can you believe that because of my tennis coach was a man, I had to quit playing tennis. And on top of that, he didn't allow me to continue my university studies. I am usually cheerful and outgoing, but all those things silenced me and I couldn't even smile anymore. He told me what to wear and where to go, just to make sure that I am totally dependent on him. If I complained, he would shout and beat me until I'd start shaking. But after my daughter's Vienna birth, something changed in me. It was like her existence gave me power, and I didn't want to be silent anymore. I wanted to be a good role model for my daughter, and I decided to fight for my daughter and for my rights. After a while, I made the biggest decision of my life to get a divorce, and I realized that I didn't have any rights to get a divorce or to have the custody of my own daughter. In the course, there are many women who were beaten and under a lot of pressure, but the government wouldn't even support them. After experiencing such things and seeing those women, I decided to become a women's rights advocate. So I started trying to help women in any way possible. First, I began working in a charity for helping old women. Then I got involved in public and political matters. After several years, I got a job in the Women's Study and Research Institute. For a long time, I believed we could change the rules, but after a while, I understood we were facing with a dictator regime with corrupt authorities. So I realized we couldn't do anything. In December 2017, a strike and anti-government demonstration started to take place all over Iran. Iranians were sick and tired of corruption, repression, and economic mismanagement. Iranian women had their own reason to protest. One named Vida Mowahed claimed a top of an electric box on Engelab Street in Tehran. As protesters followed around her, she took off her scarf and held it on a stick in front of her like a flag. She was arrested later. She was arrested later that day, but had already become the Iranian women's voice, demanding the most obvious rights of any human being to wear what they want. Those days, I was working at the Women's Institute. Their staff and I used to talk about Mowahed's bravery all the time. After a few weeks, another girl went to exact platform on Engelab Street and defiantly removed her hijab. It seems as though Mowahed's acts might have sparked a movement. Uh, the, fo- the following weeks, a colleague and I went to a women's shelter where I met a crying 30-year-old girl named Mehroush. With arms full of scars, she told me her grandfather, who was also her legal guardian, had been regularly raping her, and she had cut her arms with knives. The authorities gave her very little to almost no supports. Mehnoush's grandfather wouldn't permit her to study, but she told me she wanted to learn how to read and write. I promised her that I would help her. I went to Engelab Street to buy Mehnoush a book so I could teach her how to read. I had been crying all morning thinking about her. I was also thinking about what Vida Mowahed had done about her bravery. I wanted to do the same thing, but I was frightened. That morning, I felt a little less afraid. I walked around the platform several times because I was still scared. I thought about my daughter and what she would do if I got arrested. I repeat with myself for several times that Wiana shouldn't grow up in a country like this. And that gave me the strength. I climbed on the platform and held a white scarf above my head. I didn't say word, but I felt like I was most powerful woman in Iran, silently shouting for my rights. The feeling didn't last long. The police dragged me down and took me into custody. I was eventually tried and sentenced to 3 years in prison. I got fired from my work, daily work, my driver license, and also they didn't allow me to continue my study in university. I lost my custody of my own daughter, and I was told to hand her over to my ex-husband within 10 days, although he was addict. Before it could happen, I took my daughter and fled Iran for Turkey. We had to cross the borders illegally with the help of Islamic smuggler. While crossing the border, we could have been killed, but I didn't have any choice. Thank you.
Azam, I have heard your story many times, but every time it just breaks my heart every single time. But at the same time, I admire your bravery and other women who have done what you guys have done, which was long time ago, before this woman life revolution, woman life freedom revolution, or the movement that we have. And we really appreciate what you have done and the sacrifices. We will come back to you. We want to hear more about your story. But now we're going to go to our next panelist. And thank you again, Azam. Thank you. I know that it's tough even talking about it, and I appreciate it. Thank you. So we're going to talk with Anita Vanderbilt. Anita holds a bachelor's degree in history and political science and master's degree in political and constitutional history. She has been the Liberal Party, the member of the parliament for Autumn West Nepean since 2015, and she has been the parliamentary secretary to the Minister of International Development from 2021. Anita was the chair of Subcommittee on International Human Rights and the Special Committee on Pay Equity and the Parliamentary Women's Caucus, and is the founding chair of the All-Party Democracy Caucus. Anita worked for over a decade in international democratic development in over 20 countries, and she's the recipient of Canadian Peacekeeping Service Medal for her work in Kosovo, and she is also a sponsor of Maryam Balalpour, an Iranian political prisoner. Anita, we are honored to have you here. When I was just checking your background and your resume, there is so much that we can talk about, but because we don't have that much time, we just summarize everything. But thank you so much for being here with us. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure to be able to help you in any way that we can.
Thanks. Before we start with the question, actually, I would like to thank you for one more thing as well, for helping All for Iran team to present the Khalid Revolution photo exhibition to Canadian Parliamentary on February 16. For our audience, this exhibition demonstrated 44 years of Islamic Republic crimes, and that was I think that was a big success, and I'm really grateful for what you have done, Jenna has done, and other members of Parliament. And we would like to thank thank you supporting Iranian community. And also, if anyone wants to know about this photo exhibition, you can go to All for Iran website, and you can get more information about that too. So thanks again. And for the question, I would like to ask you something about, what you have already done, and you have a great knowledge about the history and democratic movement of the region. So I would like to know, how do you think that the woman life freedom movement in Iran can help with a sustainable democratic movement worldwide? And also, why do you think that the Canadian government should support this movement?
Well, first of all, it's really humbling to be speaking after our last speaker and some of the lived experiences that are here. I think what we're seeing right now in Iran is linked to what we're seeing around the world. It's no longer a divide in the world between east-west or north-south or right-left. The divide in the world right now is between authoritarianism and democracy. And when we say democracy, we mean a way in which everybody can have their own self-expression, that can choose how they are governed, and one that is inclusive and is based on human rights. And the attack on democracy is also an attack on feminism, because we do see around the world that it is always women first that are have their rights undermined. And what I think is that there are autocrats around the world watching to see what the reactions are in the West and what the reactions are in international communities and the community of democracies. When there is light shined on it, it actually does make a difference. And so you mentioned that our Liberal Women's Caucus, each of us has sponsored one of the brave women who is imprisoned in Iran. And many, after we tweeted and we made out statements naming these women, many of them were released, not all, and many of them in very bad condition. But it does show that international pressure does make a difference. And I think that when we look at the way in which the authoritarian countries are working together, we need democratic-minded countries to also be working together. And we as members of parliament, we as legislators are the front line of democracy. If anybody is, it's those of us who are elected. And there are so many ways we can use our platform as legislators to be able to amplify the voices. And you mentioned one, which is the Women Life Freedom photo exhibit. And I need to say that it was such a powerful exhibit. And having somebody said to me when she saw the members of parliament looking at these photographs, she said, being an Iranian woman in Iran was like shouting in a room with four walls and nobody could hear outside. But the fact is, we were able to get the evidence and the photos inside the four walls of the Parliament of Canada and let those voices be heard. And that's something we can do. We can amplify those voices. And I think that as democracies around the world, that is, it's our obligation, but it's also human. I think as women, we hear the stories like what we just heard, and there's a reason that what happened to Mahsa Jina Amini is resonating around the world with women, but with all people, because we are human beings and we have that empathy. But to be able to do more, for instance, when I make a statement in the House of Commons, a 1-minute statement, that is noticed around the world. But imagine if you had members of parliament from around the world making the same statement on the same day in 20 different countries. And this is something that I've worked together with Parliamentarians for Global Action to create the Parliamentary Rapid Response Team so that we can coordinate with members of parliament who are defending human rights to be able to work together quickly to make statements when human rights are being eradicated. And we've done that on Iran as well. But also the fact that we have parliamentary committees where we can give voice. So the subcommittee on international human rights you mentioned that I used to chair, I'm still on that subcommittee. And we're doing a study right now on women in Iran, in Afghanistan, and Saudi Arabia. And you mentioned, what is happening to Iran linked to the larger democracy movements around the world. We're seeing a regression right now in democracy. We're seeing, there's a study recently that almost 70-something% of people in the world are now no longer living in democracies. And I think that we can't look at each one in isolation. We need to have a collaboration and a solidarity with women from every country whenever rights are being undermined, whenever women are being killed and tortured and raped, and just because they want to live their lives and choose and be free. I think that it's up to us to work together around the world, but to use this incredible voice that I have as a member of parliament, and that all of us have to be able to amplify the voices of those who aren't being heard.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Anita. We'll come back to you again with more questions. Now I'm going to introduce our next panelist, Nazanin Afshinjan McKay, who is an Iranian Canadian human rights activist, public speaker, singer, songwriter, actor, and former Miss World Canada. She holds a Bachelor of International Relations and Political Science and a master's degree master's degree in diplomacy and with concentration in international conflict management. In 2016, she was conferred an honorary degree, Doctor of Laws from the University of Western Ontario. She's the president and co-founder of Stop Child Executions, the founder of the Nazanin Foundation, and the co-founder of the Iranian Justice Collective. Nazanin is the recipient of several awards for her human rights work, and we are very happy to have you here today with us, Nazanin. But before we come to you, I would like to ask you and the audience to allow us to show a short video clip, which is related to our discussion. And I would like also to remind everyone that the following images may be disturbing and viewer discretion is advised. Thank you.
مصدوم کردن بچه‌ها رو نمیذارن بریم اونجا و فیلم بگیریم ازشون. اولی صدای یه انفجار اومد، بعدش مدیر مدرسه از بلندگو اعلام کرد.
Desperation and chaos gripping Iranian cities for months. Terrified parents watch. CNN communicated with witnesses and survivors of some of these incidents at mostly girls' schools across the country.
It was a terrible situation. Girls had been falling on the floor and were crying. Some were unable to walk. We really didn't want to leave one another.
They wouldn't let us go home. They forced us to stay inside.
There was a bitter smell. There was a smell outside too. Then I felt sick.
Many of the attacks have been in the religious heartland of Iran. Yet the Minister of Education has said that most of the cases were caused by rumor and there is no problem.
Wow. So welcome back. It's very disturbing to watch these videos. Thank you, Nazanin, for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you. It's so disturbing. I was collecting myself for a minute. Thank you all for Iran for this invitation to join this esteemed panel. It is absolutely horrific what is taking place in Iran. I describe it as a war on women by the regime of the Islamic Republic. And the objective is clear.
So,
right, sorry.
So what do you believe is the main purpose behind these attacks? And what do you think that the international community can do to stop these attacks targeting young women in Iran right now?
Yes, that's what I want. You asked the question that I really wanted to focus on, because as you saw that regime official in that video, he had said, there's no problem here. But to us activists, to the people on this panel, it's very clear what's happening. The objective is very clear. And that's why I want to really emphasize this, because there are media who are relaying that message, that the propaganda that the regime is putting out to the West. So the objective is they want to punish girls and women for actively protesting, by coming out onto the streets in peaceful protests, by showing their defiance, by taking off their compulsory hijab, in other acts of nonviolent disobedience, sending videos out to the West about the abuses taking place, reports of them being raped or other kinds of abuse, being blinded. Another objective is to try and remove them from schools and public spaces. Let's not forget, the regime has already restricted certain subjects that they can or can't study in school. And also, frankly, to disempower them, to belittle them, and to try to take their power and voice. Women in the law are legally worth half of a man. Their testimonies are also worth half of a man, and discrimination is systematic and enshrined in Iran's penal code based on Sharia law. So if the regime doesn't, this regime does not regard human life, or at least women's lives, to be worth anything. They see a woman's role only being as serving men. This regime is trying to deflect blame and saying it is vigilante groups, but this is, again, laughable. This is a very organized and systemic operation. To have been able to orchestrate this across the country to over 260 schools, or somewhere around there, affecting over 1,000 elementary school girls, expanding now to include universities and girls' dormitories. I say to myself, like, if they say they can't catch these culprits, but that's crazy, because this regime has very sophisticated video surveillance systems. So these attacks have been taking over 4 months, and they have the technology to zoom in on faces of peaceful protesters and come to their homes later and arrest them, or send them infraction tickets. If women have not properly veiled themselves, they can catch these women and send them tickets later. So it's ludicrous to say that they have no kind of, they don't know who's behind this. And they're downplaying the problem. They're saying that there's no evidence of this chemical poisoning, and that this is mass hysteria and stress over exams. It's ridiculous. So what can the international community do? First of all, Western media should take notice and report what is happening. Over 127 doctors united under an umbrella group called Massa Medical, and they're suggesting pressuring the World Health Organization to send a senior member to lead a team of experts and scientists to do a proper assessment. Women's groups, women's rights groups all over the world really should join forces and stand shoulder to shoulder with Iranian women, joining in our rallies, signing our petitions, making noise and condemning this barbarity. I say, what would a mother here in Canada do if an elementary school was being gassed and her daughter was gasping for air and saying she can't breathe? Learning later that there could be long-term effects from this organophosphorus agents causing cancer and infertility. She would take this to the fullest extent of the law. And we expect the same. We expect the world community to come to the defense of these innocent civilians in Iran who are hostage to this extremist regime and recognize these as crimes against humanity. We ask the West to echo and amplify and take action on the demands that they are making on the inside of Iran, which is trying to convince the world that this regime is not reformable and must be toppled. And how we can do this is cutting off economic and diplomatic ties with the regime, exerting maximum pressure on the IRGC and regime officials, and maximum aid and support to freedom-loving Iranians. That means pressuring the EU states to designate the IRGC on the terrorist list in its entirety. It means sending the regime ambassadors back to Iran. It means applying Magnitsky sanctions with asset freezes and travel bans on regime officials. And one very practical way our parliamentarians can get involved is by supporting a campaign we just launched on International Women's Day, is to end gender apartheid in Iran and Afghanistan. And if I have time a little later, I would love to go more into detail on that, Mehrak Can.
Of course, we would love to hear about that. Yes. And you mentioned something very important, that many Iranians rightfully believe that this was an act of revenge, because these girls are people who are on the street. They are the one who started this revolution, this movement, and it's very important. And some people, they say that they have to do, the government has to do some investigating, but we know that the government of Iran, they can't do anything. It's the same thing that they did with the Ukrainian flight PS 752. And I would like to take this opportunity to remember the 176 victims of the flight PS 752, including 55 Canadian citizens, 30 permanent residents, many students, children, and an unborn child who lost their lives at the hand of the Islamic regime in this horrific crime against humanity. So we would like to remember those people too, and we will not forget and we will not forgive. And that's important. Thank you, Nazan. We will come back to you and we will ask more questions, and we would love to hear about your campaign as well. So we're going to go to our next panelist. We're going to go to Jenna Saad. Jenna has been the Liberal Member of Parliament for Kanata Colton since 2021. She holds a bachelor's in economics and Master of Arts in economics. She was the recipient of 40 Under 40 awards, both in Canada and also internationally. So it's very interesting. In 2021, she was appointed to serve as the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Women, Gender, Equality and Youth by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. And she sits on the Standing Committee on the Status of Women as a voting member as well. In support of Women Life Freedom Movement in Iran, Jenna has sponsored Rojin Marzieh Yousefzadeh, a Kurdish Iranian woman who was sentenced to 5 years in prison for participating in protests. I know that a few days ago, you and Minister Mahsi Yen led Canadian delegation to 67th session of the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women in New York. And I know that you have been super busy for the last few days, you and Anita, both of you. And I really thank you from all the team. Thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting Iranian community. And we appreciate that the Canadian government has taken some steps to support the Women Life Freedom movement in Iran. But as a parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Women, Gender, Equality and Youth, how do you define success in these actions, Jenna? And does the Canadian government have any further plans for or any policy initiatives or action to support the women of and people of Iran in the Women Life Freedom movement, specifically for those imprisoned, tortured, raped, in custody? And thank you for being here with us again.
Thank you so much. Thank you, of course, for facilitating this very important discussion tonight, but also, of course, for the ongoing efforts of so many on the screen and behind the screen that are participating tonight. I think of the theme around International Women's Day of Every Woman Matters. And, it's so incredibly topical to the discussion that we're having tonight, frankly. As you mentioned, I was at the UN on Monday and Tuesday of this week, leading Canada's delegation at the Commission on the Status of Women. And I can tell you that the plight of Iranian women, Afghan women, and others was a particular point of discussion amongst the countries that were there. Certainly on people's minds, frankly, how to better support the women, the girls, and the allies in Iran. And so, I think I just start by pointing out the obvious, that the world truly is paying attention to this movement or this revolution. And I do believe that Canada's actions to date, have been in good faith, have been with the best of intentions. We are truly horrified, of course, by the regime's violence against its own people, and frankly, just their blatant disregard for human rights. So having said that, there's still more work to do. Undeniably, we recognize that as a government and as a country. I think that our country, along with many of our allies, have taken, of course, a number of different measures in different ways to demonstrate the international resolve to confront the regime and their continued violations to the rights of the citizens, and in particular, and relevant to tonight, targeting women's rights. It's certainly, it's destabilizing regional actions, and it undermines international peace and security, which, as Anita had mentioned earlier, is just so fundamental. I did also want to mention that, in addition to some of the steps that we've taken that, are discussed at length, Canada for the last 20 years has led the successful adoption of the resolution on the situation of human rights in Iran at the UN General Assembly. And of course, as we all heard as well, our Minister of Foreign Affairs also convened women foreign ministers for the adoption of the resolution to have Iran excluded at the GA on the Commission on the Status of Women. We've imposed many sanctions. I won't get into that. I think we're all familiar with that. But all that to say, I think the members of Parliament, my colleague on the screen, and our government is very much committed to continuing to work with our allies, of course, but also with all of you as we explore, how best to continue to support the Iranian people. Those solutions, those aren't solutions that we can do on our own. And when you ask the question of, what success looks like, I believe success is measured by you as Iranian Canadians, as Iranians still there. I don't determine what success looks like, because I will know that we have been successful as a government and as members of Parliament when you tell me that you can sleep at night again, when you tell me that women aren't living in fear. And so, I think we all continue to work towards that end. And the only way to success is doing that together.
Thank you. Thank you, Jenna. I think that maybe our audience, they have more question about what we are talking about. So I would invite them to ask us question. If you want, you can submit your question and we're going to come back to our panelists and we're going to ask those questions. But thank you for this discussion, and we will come back and we're going to talk about it again. And still, before we go to Najma, I want to say that we have seen, at least you and Anita, you have been very supportive of this movement in Ottawa, but you know that we want the voice of people in Iran to be heard here in Canada, especially at Parliament Hill. So that's why this is our job as Iranian Canadians. So we are trying to do our job as the same as you are trying to do your job. So thank you again. So we're going to go to Najma now, Najma Tansaz. She is an Iranian Canadian professional boxer, a certificate boxing coach from the Canadian Boxing Federation, an athlete and a personal trainer. She's also an actress, having been in several films, and also the director of a short film. Najma coaches as MJKO, a youth charity focused on using boxing for social change. During COVID, she organized a free sports social gathering for Iranian newcomers. Her political activities include organizing Running for Freedom event, giving speeches, and doing interviews with news programs about the Iranian Revolution. Najma, thank you for being here with us from Toronto. As a female athlete, what were some of the major struggles that you faced in Iran? We can't hear you, Najma. I think that you're muted. I think that you have to unmute yourself. Let's try one more time. A few months ago, or a few years ago, actually, before the era of COVID, we didn't even have this, luxury of having this.
Hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you. Thank you. I thought that because I can't hear you, but now you're back. So let's have our conversation. First of all, thank you for being here with us, Najma. I know that you are very busy as well, and you have lots of activities, but it's good that we have you here because we want to hear from someone like you who is a woman, and she's an athlete, and she was in Iran, and you lived the life of athlete in Iran and also in Canada. So tell us about your journey in Iran.
Hi, everyone. First of all, happy International Women's Day. Thanks for having me today. As I've said a lot about the challenges, but I would like to also talk about how women are treated. After I will talk about the challenges that athletes and especially I face in Iran. Women are the second priority in Iran. They have no say in a lot of things, including getting a divorce, having the right to raise their kids after the divorce, leaving the country without permission from the husband or father, many other challenges. They are always discriminated against because of their gender. Being female is like a sin. Many people think women should only be at home raising kids and giving service to their husband. As an athlete, you face double the challenges. Not only that, we don't have a sports facility and a budget, but we are also banned from going to the stadium to the watch sport like soccer and other activities that are played by men. Gender discrimination in sports is very noticeable. Some people think that women are not supposed to a sport like boxing or weightlifting in a sport is very that are meant for men because their bodies will change and they won't be able to have kids. Getting a motorcycle license is forbidden for women, which was something that I always wanted, but it wasn't possible because I was a woman. Another thing was competition. Women can only compete in a sport that they can cover themselves in. But can you imagine competing in a wetsuit in a swimming competition? Proper sportswear is needed to have better performance, but women in Iran with all the cover-ups be able to achieve that. Lots of women go through all these challenges to be able to do the sport that they love, including me. When I got interested in boxing and I wanted to learn, there is no place for me to go. No federation for female boxing or even a proper facility that would teach boxing to women. I had to sneak into a men's boxing club and learn boxing from a male coach. Practicing in a boxing men's club is illegal in Iran for women. This was a scary and unusual situation, and I had to tolerate to heavy look of those who were there in that club, which was very uncomfortable, but that didn't stop me from doing what I love. Besides boxing, which was an important part of my life, I always had a passion for becoming an actress. which was very hard for me, for a woman to pursue in Iran. With all the suffocation that women face every day, I didn't want my little girl to go through what I went through. I wanted my daughter to have dreams, be whoever she wants to be. I wanted my daughter to be able to ride a bike, swim, or whatever whatever sport she wanted to play without needing to cover herself. I didn't want to her be forced to wear a hijab as soon as she started school. I wanted freedom for my little girl, something that women in Iran don't have the right to. That is when decided to come to a country that would give women values, and you can be who you want to be without limitation.
Thank you, Najma. It's very interesting what you said, and also Aslan said it in the beginning of our discussion, that both of you have daughters, and you thought about your daughters because this is the future, and you don't want them to live the life that you had, because you know the limitation, you know the discrimination. And I'm happy that both of you are in Canada and you are safe and your daughters are safe. But also I would love my country, Iran, as well, to have the same situation, the same opportunity for all women, because especially for us as Iranian Canadian, we are privileged that we are living this life, that we have the opportunity here too. But we think about families, friends, everyone, all the women, not just in Iran, around the world, in the same region, in Afghanistan, in other countries. So that's very important. But that was very interesting that you both had the same. And thank you again, Najma, and we will come back to you and we will ask you more questions about your journey after coming to Canada as well. So this concludes our first round of questions, and we will start our second round after a short video clip. And if you want to submit any question, please submit them via the Q&A feature on the webinar, and we're going to come back to you. Thank you.
In Iran, women live under a gender apartheid regime.
By law, I'm not allowed to make a trip outside of the country without my dad or my husband's official permission.
By law, polygamy is allowed for my husband.
It is forbidden for me to ride a bike or go to a stadium to watch a match.
By law, my inheritance is half of a man's.
By law, I can't be a singer or sing in public.
By law, I'm not allowed to leave the house without a compulsory hijab.
Because I was born a member of Baha'i religion's minority, I am banned from pursuing a post-secondary education or getting a job. In fact, I am not entitled to basic rights of a citizen.
As a mom, I have no custody rights for my son after the age of 2 and for my daughter after the age of 7.
A woman's testimony in court is only worth half that of a man.
These are challenges
an Iranian woman
faces
daily life.
So, Nazanin Jan, I think that we have to come back to you. We just saw you on this video clip and we would like to hear more. And please tell us about your organization, Iranian Justice Collective, and its activities in support women life freedom movement. And also tell us, how do you think that the Canadian government can support this organization's vision? I think that we lost Nazanin. I can't see her here. Okay. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna check if she can come back, but at least we watched the video, which was important. And I think that it would be good for everyone to go to their website and see, about their vision and everything that they are doing. But we're gonna come back to Nazanin again. But now that we don't have her yet, so let's go to the next panelist. We're gonna come back to you, Najma. if it's okay. And because you just talk about this situation, everything that you said, so it's very fresh, and we can come back to you and we can ask you about, your journey after coming to Canada. And we would love to hear about your maybe struggles, maybe, I don't know, opportunities, anything that you think that is important to share with us. And tell us that how did you become involved in the Women Life Freedom movement, and what events have you participated in, and anything that you think is important for us to know. Thank you.
Coming to Canada, its own challenges, things like the language barrier and leaving family and friends behind. But the most challenging part is starting from zero and building your life at an older age. Canada is the land of opportunities. As soon as we settle down in Canada, I look into how can I get my boxing certificate from Boxing Canada. Even though my English wasn't great, I was able to get my boxing certificate. I start my own sport club. Since I'm older, it's not as easy for me to compete. That's why I decided to put my focus on coaching younger women and getting them ready for competition, something that I could never dream of doing in Iran. As a woman, I can grow and become better every day and have the freedom to do whatever I want, something that women in my country are stripped of. As I mentioned before, women can get a motorcycle license, but I was able to get that in Canada. I can now ride a bike and exercise in nature with proper clothing meant for sport. I hope women in Iran will soon be able to have that. I was able to play in several movies and even made my own short film called Mommy, which was selected to go to the Arcade International Film Festival. I'm currently working on 2 movies about what is now happening in Iran. When COVID hit and people become isolated in their homes, I thought about what is now to help. I started online classes and also free outdoor social sport gathering for women and new immigrants, so they could come out of the house and exercise. When Mahsa Jina Amini was killed by the morality police, it brought back memories of when I was arrested in Iran by them. I was shocked of a couple of days, but then when I saw this inspiring, brave women of Iran who are fundamental their objection by burning the scarf, I thought it was about time for women in Iran, so stand up for their stand up for their women. I'm a fighter. I decided to do everything in my power to bring the voice of Iranian women to Western countries. Since I was athlete, I decided to organize a running event and called Running for Freedom. I have given speech at a protest that have been organized in Toronto by different organizers, and participate is very single event that has happened here. Also have had interview about women on a different news network. I was planning to visit Iran this year, but due on the activities I have had here in Canada, I can't go back to Iran anymore. because my life would be in a danger. I haven't seen my family for years. Not only do I need my mother, my mother, but I also want my daughter to see her grandmother and get to know her. Every time she sees a plane, she tells me, I wish that the grandma was coming. I applied for mom to come for a visit, but her application was rejected. This is not just about me. I have heard that for many people who had their loved ones visas rejected as well. There are also many people whose lives are in danger or have fled the country, are waiting to go accepted by country like Canada. I really would like the member of parliament to bring this issue up and help them, as well as helping activists like me to reunite with their families.
Thank you, Najma. That's very important issue, actually, because as you mentioned, like now we have Azam here who fled the country. She knew that she can't go back and she can't visit her family. She can see her family. Her family can't come here. You came to Canada as as an immigrant, but then you started to do activities that, because of your activities, now you can't go back to Iran, and we understand that. And of course, everyone wants to be united with their families. They want to see the families. Not only they want to bring the families here, but also even if the family member, they don't want to live in Canada, but they want to have the opportunity to visit them, to see them, and I totally understand that. I know that the Canadian government, they have, they have new policies that they're gonna help, but we haven't seen anything about this particular issue. So I'm happy that we have the member of the parliament. Actually, it's better that we talk to them. So I'm going to ask Anita, but Jenna, you are welcome to talk about it as well after that. But my second question to Anita was actually something similar to what you explained, but I want her to think about your question as well. But we know, Anita, that women who have fled Iran and now live in Canada, they have experienced many challenges and obstacles to finding freedom and equality, the same way that we saw with Azam's story and with Najma's stories too. But how can the government of Canada support Iranian human rights defenders in Canada? If there's anything that you want to say about, what they have done in the past, not even for Iranian, if they have done it for any other, countries, any other, problem that they had in the international world. And what do you think that they can specifically do with Iranian women at this moment of, time?
Well, thank you so much for that question. And I can hear, in terms of family reunification, that's something in my office that I've always said is the #1 priority, because not only is it a human thing, but we want people to be able to be reunited with their families. And there's a number of policies. I won't get into a lot of details here, including parental sponsorship and others. But the one thing I wanted to outline is that one of the things that our subcommittee on international human rights, when I was the chair of the committee, one of the things that we recommended was that there be a special stream of immigration specifically for human rights defenders. And it came out of a study on women human rights defenders, where we heard testimony from around the world. Countries like Sweden had done similar things. And we did actually create that stream. And one of the problems for human rights defenders is that the criteria for even visitor visas, let alone immigration, often the very things that say, well, you're likely to go back, are things that impact human rights defenders. So there might be arrest warrants out for them, or there might be, not being able to hold property and things like that. So we did create this stream. We have right now 250 human rights defenders a year. And one of the things I've been pushing for quite some time, and I'm hoping that it'll be one of our recommendations from the current study on Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Afghanistan, is to vastly expand that. It's kind of almost like it was a test case to see how it can be done. I think it needs to be scaled up enormously, which would create, and this is something where, I think the public and those of you who are human rights defenders and know human rights defenders, this is something that I think you can advocate, because I think that's one of the key things that we can do as Canada, not just for Iran, but for human rights defenders around the world. There's a couple of other things that I think that we could do more of. One of the things I've heard, and I'm actually looking forward to hearing some of your suggestions of what we can do more, but is about protection, because we know that those of you, and I think it's phenomenal, especially those of you that we're hearing from this evening, that you've come to Canada and you're able to live in freedom, and yet you still spend, like this evening, your time and your energy and your passion and your commitment to trying to change things in Iran. And I think that that can sometimes put people in danger. And it's not just Iran, it's China and Russia and others, where people are targeted here in Canada because of their advocacy. And I think there should be some kind of public persons protection service of some sort. And I think it should include broadly elected members, media and journalists who speak out, judges, anybody who is targeted because of their human rights advocacy. So that's something that I've been pursuing, and we haven't done it yet, but it's something we could do more of. And the other thing that I think that is not spoken about, and a little bit taboo even, is that many times, and this is again not just Iranian women, but women who flee conflict or places where there has been sexual violence used systemically, either as a weapon of war or a weapon of repression. When they do arrive in Canada, it can take years or even decades before these women are ready to talk about it. But when they do, are the supports there for them, the mental health supports, the targeted supports, because it's a very different kind of needs for trauma like that. And I would love to see more study in Parliament, but perhaps we could do something to make sure that those kinds of supports are there. I know that in all of the programming that we do, we make sure that newcomers and immigrant women are included, whether it's our study on gender-based violence, whether it's programming for gender programs. But I would really be interested to hear more of the kinds of things that your needs are, because it's one thing for us to advocate for it, but really, this evening has been very, very eye-opening for me, and I think that we need to, as members of Parliament, keep these communication lines open so that we hear what you need. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita. Thank you. You talk about so many different things. I was trying to take notes and talk about it, but because of the time limits, limitation that we have, it's difficult to to talk about every single issues. But I totally get what you said too. We're going to come back to those as well, because we know that some of our audience, they have sent us some questions actually regarding the same issues as well. So we're going to come back to you. But now that we talk about this issue, I would like to ask Jenna about the same question too. If you want to add anything, Jenna, we would like to hear about that as well.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would add to that, which MP Venabel didn't touch too much on, was around some of the more recent measures that we put in place with respect to immigration. And I believe it was yourself who had said, we've introduced some to address some aspects, but there's still more work to do. And I would say that, the measures that we announced, I believe it was just last week, or maybe it was earlier this week, I'm sleep deprived, were really focused on helping Iranian nationals that are here in Canada. So whether that be extending their temporary residence status, or any sort of change in that status. So we're very focused on Iranians that are here. And to a point that was made, I think there's ongoing work with respect to what more needs to happen from an immigration perspective, whether that's reuniting families or whether that's simply just more Iranians coming here for obvious reasons. So that's just to touch on that. Now, having said that, I think that as a community, there's still, of course, lots of ways that the Iranian Canadian community can continue to engage with us as the federal government in order to help guide us as we continue to examine these issues and create various programs and policies. I think the Women Life Freedom movement and revolution has really captured Canadians' attention, our attention as parliamentarians. And I would encourage everyone on this call and beyond to continue the dialogue with us and with your neighbors. I mean, there's a piece of education that goes with this as well, right? There's a piece of making sure that your neighbors, friends of friends are understanding the gravity of what is happening right now. And that's not to be taken for granted because not everyone has those connections. So there's an education piece. And then, as I said, I think the continued leveraging of your voice, which enables us to better leverage your voice with our own, is really, really important.
Thank you, Jenna. I have a follow-up question. How would you recommend that the Iranian Canadian encourage the government to take action to support this movement? Is there anything that you think that is important for us to do? Because we want you to do so many things, but what can we do so we can encourage you to do what we want to do as well?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I would say more of this, right? Like these dialogues are so important, whether they're in a forum like this or whether they're in a smaller one-on-one or smaller group forum. These discussions in which we can really hone in on your recommendations that then as parliamentarians we can take, whether that's in committee work, whether that's working amongst our colleagues in other fashions. It's really your voice that empowers us and educates us in order to take those steps. So I would encourage those ongoing dialogues and meetings. I think that the various very large and successful rallies and events that have been hosted across the country have helped to galvanize support, not only from the Canadian government, but the Canadian public as well. So I would continue to encourage that. And just as I said, continuing to use your voice. You're always welcome to reach out to myself. Many of you do, and not to speak for MP Vandenbeld, but I'm sure she feels the same. I know my colleague MP Yazir Naqvi from Ottawa South is on the meeting here tonight and has been active on these issues as well. So we're here to listen, we're here to learn, we're here to act on your behalf, but we need you as part of the solution.
Thank you, Jenna. Thank you, Anita, as well. And thanks to many other members of the parliament that I can see that they are part of this conversation. We have some of them in participating in today's panel too. We can see them, and we appreciate your presence, and we know that you are hearing us, you're listening to Iranian people, and that's important to us. It is important to us, and it's so important to the international community as well. So now that we have Nazanin back, so I would like to go back to Nazanin. We miss you. So I don't know what happened, but I'm happy that you're back. We watched a video clip that it was, from your website. And our question was, about the organization Iranian Justice Collective. And we would like to know about your activities. I know that you guys have been super active recently, and there have been, so many things that you had announcement about, people who fled the country, they are in other countries, and if they are not safe. And I have so many people who are reaching to us, and, they're asking us if there is anything that they can do. So that's important. We would like to hear about that. And also another part of the question is that we want to see how can the Canadian government support your organization's vision, if there is anything that, or us, even as, volunteer or just Iranian Canadian people, how can we help?
Well, first of all, I want to say I apologize for disappearing. All of a sudden, my computer just shut out. Everything was working. And the last time I was on an interparliamentary group for the Friendship of Iran and Canadian Parliament, that Zoom bomb, or I can't remember to it. So I don't know what's going on, but the regime sure has feelers out there, and I don't know if it's responsible this time, but I'm now joining you from my phone. So how IJC formed and what we're about and how the Canadian government can help. After the death of Mahsa Jina Amini, fellow nonpartisan friends, activists, lawyers, other professionals from the Iranian diaspora got together, and we formed a group to help projects that would help replace the Islamic Republic with a democratic system. And we ended up calling ourselves Iranian Justice Collective. And our primary focus is on pursuing democratic governments around the world to take an increased action in support of Iran's revolution. And when about 20,000 Iranians were arrested in peaceful protest, many were given death sentence. So our first project was to create a database of political prisoners and assign them to members of parliament in Western countries to sponsor them and to keep their voices and names alive in the media. And we know that when political prisoners' names are in public spheres, the regime is hesitant to carry out execution and is more likely to reduce their sentences. And we've even gotten word that prison guards treat prisoners better when the name alert is out there. And certainly the spirits of the political prisoners are boosted as well. And I know our two guests here from Parliament have also already sponsored. So thank you so much for doing that. That was just our first project. And we also completed a list of 71 children who have been killed by this regime since Mahsa, with their profiles and their pictures on a website called saytheirnames.ca. And now we have a complete list of schools that have been attacked and poisoned. And for International Women's Day, we created, as you saw, a video campaign highlighting women's rights abuses. And we're partnering to support a big campaign to end gender apartheid in Iran and Afghanistan, which I alluded to a little bit earlier. As you all remember, the world got together to end the racial apartheid regime in South Africa. And we'd like to do the same and end the tyranny and gender apartheid in the Islamic Republic of Iran and in Afghanistan. So the word apartheid comes from the Afrikaans word means apart. And that is the reality for Afghan and Iranian women as second-class citizens. And the components of apartheid are subjugation and subordination. As of now, they only apply to the definition of race. So in essence, what we're trying to do is expand the legal definition of apartheid at the national and international level to include gender, so that we have the grounds to criminalize this and prosecute those responsible. So we would like the Canadian Parliament to issue a resolution condemning gender apartheid in the Islamic Republic of Iran and in Afghanistan and holding them accountable for that. What we're doing, we're working on the legal aspects to have gender apartheid recognized in the crime of apartheid. So if parliaments in the West take a strong stand, this will help our legal efforts in The Hague and in the UN General Assembly to get these international laws changed and national laws as well. And a lot of people say, are you crazy? This can't be done. But it's the same people that told us a few months ago when we launched another campaign to try to get the Islamic Republic of Iran off of the Commission for the Status of Women. So we know it is possible. We created an event that was unprecedented, and we're very determined to do the same for this campaign. So I guess what can the government do to support us is really to keep that communication channel open, like our MPs have already mentioned, to give us kind of that line of communication. And I encourage more members of parliament and senators to get on board with Senator Omid Var's initiation with MP Ali Essasi, who created that interparliamentary group, friendship group for Iran. So
I think we lost you, Nazanin. Okay. I think, yes, I think we lost Nazanin again, and I know that she's talking on her phone, so hopefully she can come back and continue the conversation. But what she's saying is very important too.
yes, Rebel.
Yes, Nazanin, we didn't have you for a few seconds, so if you can just repeat the last part of your conversation, that would be great.
I was just saying that to keep the communication channels open so that we're able to continue the dialogue and encouraging more MPs and senators to get on board, joining the interparliamentary group that Senator Omid Var and MP Ali Essasi have started, a friendship group for Iran, and so that we can work on specific projects and potentially more resolutions and getting our elected officials representing the Iranian Canadian community in the demands to potentially seize the assets of regime officials that are in our midst, those that are spying on us, and repurposing them for those that have been abused by the system, and also potentially putting those funds into projects that help the Iranian revolution, whether it's communication and technology channels or a strikers fund to help Iranians be able to rise up and have these mass demonstrations.
Thank you, Nazanin. Thank you. That's very important what you mentioned, because I see that other people who are our audience who are asking questions, they're asking about this specific thing as well. If the government, they can do that with, with properties that we have even in Canada, the properties of people who are related to the government. And we might come back to this point when we have the question and answer part. But thank you again for everything that you are doing. And we hope that we can see you success, because it's, your success is our success, and it's important for everyone. So, and we are really grateful, and we appreciate your help. Thanks. So our last panelist to answer the second question is Azam, who was our first panelist to talk. And it's been a long time, Azam, but thank you for being here with us. And I know that you are not in Canada. Yes. So tell us about your journey after coming to Canada. Talk about your struggles before coming to Canada. So let us know what you have done after coming to Canada, and what have you done since the start of this Women Life Freedom movement?
When I first began working in the field of women's rights, I knew I was up against a dictatorial system, but I held onto the belief that we could affect change. That's why I became a Girls of Revolution Street, hoping to make our voices heard. However, at the time, I felt as though our message was being ignored. It seems as though political issues were prioritized over women's rights, and we felt isolated and alone. But with the rise of the Women Life Freedom movement and the subsequent global attention it received, I now feel empowered and more confident than ever before. The movement has given us a louder voice, and women like myself who have experienced the hardship of the Islamic Republic are being given more opportunity to speak out. It's a refreshing change from the usual voices that speak about Iranian women's issue, and I'm grateful for the change to represent the women fighting for their rights back home. Currently, I'm residing outside Iran, where I can continue to amplify the voice of Iranian women who are still fighting for their rights. This is the first time that an international movement has united with Iranian to support our cause, and it brings hope for brighter future for our people. Importantly, we must acknowledge the efforts of the women who are fighting for their rights in Iran, and to give them their recognition and attention and that they deserve. These women are leading the charge for change in Iran. Their unwavering commitment and bravery in the face of adversity are admirable, and they should be at the forefront of any conversation surrounding women's rights in Iran. As a member of the movement, I am constantly inspired by their actions and determination to bring about change.
Thank you, Azam. Thank you. We really appreciate, your presence and what you are doing, what you have done, and what you have gone through. And we hope to see you success too. And thank you for being here from Europe. And I know that you have been super busy the last few days talking about these experiences. And I know that it's very difficult to talk about those experiences. You just have to go through it over and over, but we appreciate your presence. Thank you. So I think that at this time, we have already talked to all the panelists at least twice. And we have some questions so that our audience have sent us via Google Forms prior to the event, and some questions were submitted through the Q&A features of the webinar. So we're going to go through the question. We're going to ask some of them. I know that we don't have that much time because each of our panelists, they're going to have their own, final remarks as well, but we're going to try our best. So let's get to the questions. I see that we have the first question that I can see here is, I guess, let me see. So we have question for Jenna. So Jenna, they have asked that what are the most effective sanctions that have been put in place in the past to address human rights abuses, and why do you consider them effective, and what result have they helped to achieve?
Finding my unmute button. Thank you. Okay, most effective sanctions and what have they helped achieve? So this is a great question. And off the top of my head, I believe there was about 189 entities that have been sanctioned, and I believe about 139 individuals. And I think what's important to put into context here is above and beyond, the obvious acknowledgement that these individuals or entities have played a role in the regime's systematic human rights violations. But it is also a mechanism in which we can ensure that they are not able to enter our country and that assets can be seized. One of the pieces that is, I would suggest is still a work in progress, or there's still, some work underway, is around creating that database as well. That is, in part, I think, has been championed by the families that, of course, lost loved ones in PS 752. creating a database as well is I think, in my mind, that step that is still underway, that is the next big piece. You know, I think Canada will not undoubtedly be a safe haven for those that support the regime. And in order to get to that point, we need to ensure that we have that database and that we have the support of Canadians and Iranian Canadians that are here to help us make that effective. The sanctions that have been imposed as well, a question that I have asked and that I know our officials are working on is around what assets have been seized and what is happening in that realm. I don't have those numbers to share with you, but I can tell you that it is work that is ongoing. Again, as a Canadian government, we're incredibly seized by this, but we're also incredibly committed to make sure that we hold the regime and those supporting it to the highest extent possible to account.
Thank you, Jenna. The numbers of questions that are coming is unbelievable. We got many questions beforehand, but now we are getting many more questions. The next question is actually for Anita. So they are asking, what's stopping the Canadian government from declaring the IRGC as a terrorist organization, and how can the citizens and activists put more pressure to see more actions rather than only statements and condemnation? So what do you think? What's the most effective way?
Well, no, thank you for that. And let me first say that statements and condemnation actually do matter. You know, I think that we shouldn't underestimate that. As far as the IRGC, I was in the last parliament and voted that this is a terrorist entity myself. As you know, that parliament did take that vote across party lines. And I think that is very impactful when you have legislators doing that. I don't think there is any doubt in anybody's mind that this is a terrorist entity. I think in the fact of it. I'm not going to get into, you know, where some of the difficulties are. I have talked to some very senior members of the Canadian Armed Forces who have talked about, you know, potential repercussions and impacts on international law of conflict and war and the Geneva Convention and things like that. But I think what I really would like to leave people here with is we need to get to what that would achieve. What is it that we need to stop from happening? And Jenna talked about this. We do not want anybody from IRGC to be able to find safe haven in Canada. We don't want them to be able to hide their money here. We don't want them to be able to act here in Canada to terrorize, frankly, Iranian Canadians who are fighting for freedom in Iran for women. So I think that there are many, many, many ways and many steps that our government has taken in order to do that. And to say what it is that the Iranian Canadian community can do to have impact, well, frankly, some of the suggestions that have come from this particular panel are enormously helpful. You mentioned Senator Omidyar, and I know that on seizing assets, she's been leading on a lot of that, and we did make changes in our Budget Implementation Act in terms of what our legal mechanisms in Canada under legislation to be able to do those sorts of things and to identify and track. There are some incredibly good international, for-profit and non-profit entities that are doing an incredible amount of work on anti-corruption right now. And one of the things they're looking at is how do you create a trust or a fund where a particular country, and they're looking at this in terms of corruption, but this can just as well be, something that you would use in Ukraine or in Iran, where you have officials who, that these assets that are seized, once somebody has been declared, for instance, under Magnitsky sanctions, to be able to put that into something that will then bring restitution back to the victims. And there's a lot of work going on this. And I really think that this is an area where we could use expertise and advocacy from the community to find the mechanisms in which to repurpose those funds. It's one thing to seize those assets, but how do you then, who gets that money? Where does it go? Is there under, even international law, a mechanism that you can actually use to create something where it doesn't then end up diverted, or where there is justification? It's harder to do. So I would say that that's an area of advocacy. This notion of gender apartheid, I am really, really intrigued and interested. And what I have to say is, for many of us as legislators, we're looking for something to do. I think it's a natural human reaction to want to do something. But when you give us the something, whether it was the list of prisoners that we could then sponsor, whether it's supporting something like this concept of gender apartheid, which I hadn't really thought about before, whether it's the motion that you're talking about, I think it's really important that you continue that. This kind of a discussion is vital, but do reach out to us directly as well. Reach out to all MPs. This is not a partisan issue. You need to know that members of parliament from every single party, we are all equally committed to this. The government is equally committed to this. And I think the important thing is to give us the what, give us the things that we can do that will make a tangible difference right now. Because as I said, I think that not just us, but Canadians are looking for something. And if we hear the horror stories and we don't have that sense of we can do something about it, it's when you're in the danger of compassion fatigue. So keeping it front of mind, talking about the horrors, but giving us solutions as well, that's one of the most important things that you can do.
Thank you, Anita. And now that we are talking about this, we actually got a question that I'm gonna ask Nazanin about it, because the question is, what tangible benefits will Iranian women derive from a change in expanding the legal definition of apartheid to include gender? So that's very important, subject. And right now, Anita talked about it. I know that Jenna has things to add as well, but I would like Nazanin to answer this question, because this is the question that I asked you. So
definitely. So by expanding the definition, that's when we can legalize it almost. We can use it to then criminalize the perpetrators. We can prosecute regimes that commit gender apartheid. So again, if I relate it back to South Africa, the whole world got on board to boycott South Africa for their racial apartheid and, change that entire regime. Well, same thing we're trying to do to end not only the gender apartheid in Iran, but end the tyranny as a result of. So, but first, we have to expand that definition, because as of now, as I said, it only applies to race. But now we have to expand it so that we can actually change the international laws at the UN and at The Hague, and then the national laws as well.
Thank you, Nazanin. We received many questions. I know that we don't have time for all of them, but one thing that I just want to mention, I'm not going to ask anyone, but I'm going to just mention because I think that is important, maybe as those ideas that Anita was talking about too. Someone asked if someone said that, that there are many women who were victims of acid attacks in Iran, and those who were blinded also by the government in this, protest. So this person is asking if the government of Canada is able to come up with a program to support those people to come to Canada and follow up their, their medical procedures in Canada. That's something very important. And I know that other groups have been talking about it too, but I think that this is something that we can't do it just as a, citizen. We have to work with the government to see if there is any program, a special program that we can help, those people, because this is about the rights of, the human rights, and also the rights of people with disabilities as well. It's so many people were attacked during these protests, and they are suffering. And it's very important, I think, to talk about this as well. As I mentioned, due to the limited time of the webinar, unfortunately, we cannot take all the questions. But for all those questions that we couldn't cover today, we have already, we have, copied everything. So we have all of them. We're going to pass them to everyone. They can answer them whenever they have time. I know that you guys are very busy as well. But after that, when we get the answers, we're going to share them on our website, so it could be accessible to everyone. And I promise that we will do that. And I know that the team, they will want to do it as well. By the way, before we go to the closing remarks of each panelist, I have to tell Azam and Najmeh that many of our participants, they have reached out and they have asked us to tell you that they value your comments, your efforts, and they care about, your past, your present, and your future. And they said that they appreciate you sharing your story with them too. So I just wanted to pass this to you because it's important. And thank you for those who have commented that. Thank you for those who have sent us the questions. And now, because of the time, we're going to go to each panelist. They're going to have their own closing remarks. And I promise that we're going to have this kind of conversations again in the future, because as Anita and Jenna also mentioned, it's important. And also it is important to hear from other activists who are working, like Nazanin and other activists in Canada who are working, because we have to know what they are doing. So maybe we can help them in different ways as well. So I'm going to start for the closing remarks. I'm going to start with Azam. Thank you, Azam, and we want to hear from you.
Thank you for having me. I am deeply concerned about the situation in Iran, and wish to ask your support for the Iranian people who are facing intense censorship and gross human rights violations. As you may already know, Iran has been experiencing widespread protest against its authoritarian regime since November 2019. In response, the government has resorted to violent crackdown and mass arrests. Tragically, according to news, over 1,500 people have lost their lives, while thousands more have been injured and detained. In light of these developments, I urge you to take action on behalf of Canada to help protect the rights and safety of Iranians who are risking their lives for democracy. Especially, I request that you condemn the Iranian government's use of internet shutdown as a violation of international law and human rights. You provide technical assistance and funding for VPN services that can help Iranians bypass internet censorship. I appreciate your attention to this matter, and I hope that Canada will stand with the Iranian people in their struggle for freedom. Sorry about my interview. I'm sleepy. Here is 2 p.m. and I'm appreciate for having me.
Thank you, Azam. I know that you are traveling tomorrow too, and it's 2 a.m. there. So I really appreciate you being with us. Thank you. So we're going to go to Najmeh, and we're going to have her closing remarks as well.
I would like to thank All for Iran for giving me the opportunity to be a part of this panel discussion, and thank all the panelists, also member of Parliament Jenna and Anita for hearing us tonight, and hoping they would be our voices. I know there are some new immigration rules that the Canadian government has introduced, but I just hope they consider a little more flexible laws for activists like us, who cannot go back to visit their families. Lastly, for the government to listen to the Iranian Canadian requested, which is not much. All we want is to put the RIGC on their terrorist list and kick those who are connected to the government of Iran out of Canada.
Thank you, Najma. Thank you. I know that the members of the parliament, they have heard you, and I know that they're going to pass it to other members, and hopefully we're going to have, some changes in, not just for you, for many women, and not just only women, many Iranian who are here, and they are fighting for, for free Iran, and we appreciate our allies' hard work as well. Thank you, Najma. Thank you for being with us. Nazanin, it's your turn, and we would love to hear from you. I know that you have a lot to say, actually, because you are doing different things, and you want to inform us about it too. But I think that it's important for people who want to hear your story, what you are doing, your activities, also to maybe they can follow your, your activities, the website, and they can hear from you as well.
Well, if anyone wants to continue following, they can join our campaign, www.endgenderapartheid.today. They can also come on to the Iranian Justice Collective website, ijcollective.com. And I've also created a hub website that features a lot of Iranian diaspora groups that are very active, as well as the Iranian political parties on the outside of Iran. It's all under a website, www.womanlifefreedomcoalition.com. So there's a lot of information there to get you started. But I just wanted to recap some of the things that people have mentioned in this talk. So first of all, MP Vanderbilt had mentioned that there's the divide that we see in today's global world is really the divide between authoritarian governments and democracies. And she's absolutely right. We're seeing every day more and more partnerships between these dictators. For example, Putin and Khamenei, you see pictures of them shaking hands and developing deals that ultimately bring a lot of violence and terrorism to the world. So what we need to do on the West is the liberal democracies need to unite to support the Woman Life Freedom movement. And I was very interested in learning about this rapid response team that you mentioned, MP Vanderbilt. We'd love to learn more about that and how we can basically use the channels of connection between these different governments to be able to speak with a united voice on the Iranian freedom movement demands as well. Next, also on the point of the MPs saying that they're looking for something to do. This is for all of us that are listening in. Please take note of this. It's one thing to always, as she said, talking about the abuses that are taking place in Iran, the egregious, oh my God, I forgot my word, egregious human rights abuses that are taking place in Iran. But we need to focus in on what they can do. We need to give them tangible projects. So that's a challenge for everybody listening in that want to do something. And one thing that I didn't mention earlier that I would like to focus on for the MPs to maybe take home is concentrating on the refugees that are coming out of Iran, those that, you know, are really fearing for their lives at this stage, you know, because they've been so brave, risking their life, risking their everything, being blinded, being, as one of our panelists already mentioned, if there's a way of expediting some of these files, I mean, we have thousands already waiting in Turkey to be administered to Canada, but if there's a way of expanding that, I know there's a small program, there's a small window of time where they're taking in 250 refugees that fall under the category of human rights activists or what have you. But if we can expand that, because there are definitely people that are needed to come here to help this movement. There are experts that can really help move this along. And just lastly, I want to say, may all of our daughters grow up to be as brave and strong as Najma and Azam and even Mehrak. Mehrak, you didn't get to tell your life story, but there's a big story behind there. And I hope one day the rest of the people listening in can hear your story as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Nazanin. Thank you. We really appreciate your hard work, and we would love to hear more about it in the future. So we're going to go to Jenna next, and we're going to hear your remarks.
All right, thank you so much. This has really been enlightening. As has been said, I think both myself and MP Vandenbelt, I know I've taken lots of notes anyways. I will have lots of ideas and feedback to take back to Parliament when we return tomorrow. A few things I wanted to highlight, and I know MP Vandenbelt touched on it with respect to the IRGC. You know, here we are asking you to tell us what to do, and I know you've told us what to do many times when it comes to the IRGC. So I want to acknowledge that, and I want to say that it is still very much alive and an ongoing conversation. You know, not to get in again to all of the details, but there's considerable logistical and legal concerns with respect to declaring the IRGC as a terrorist entity under Canada's criminal code. But as I said, it is a live and ongoing conversation. One of the items that really weighs on me in this discussion is unintended consequences of doing so on Iranian Canadians that have no affiliation with the regime. So all that to say, our Justice Department, Global Affairs, they continue the hard work that we ask of them to examine what we can be doing. And I know similar conversations are happening in the EU and the UK and elsewhere. So all that to say, I want to acknowledge that head on. You've asked, and we are continuing to explore that. I mentioned some of the work that's ongoing with respect to the database for identifying IRGC members. I've heard loud and clear from all of you the need to examine Canada's role and the world's role, frankly, with respect to the poisoning that is happening, in particular in girls' schools. Immigration issues wholeheartedly, as I said earlier, we've taken some steps, at least for those on our soil, but there is so much more to be done for those that are still in Iran. And concentrating on refugees, as was just pointed out, is certainly a step that is being looked at. I really am intrigued, and am so glad, Nazarene, that you brought forward the gender apartheid discussion and the challenge I would accept with respect to moving forward a resolution. And I look forward to examining what more we can do as a parliament on that front. All that to say, I am so grateful for this conversation. I am grateful that you have pulled us all together to have this discussion, to acknowledge the work that still needs to be done, and to acknowledge the struggle that we know this continues to be for so many. So, I hope you know that we are your allies. We are here as your members of parliament, as government, to continue to do what we can to defend human rights and to ensure that we hold this regime to account. So thank you.
Thank you, Jenna. Thank you. Anita, last but not least, we're going to hear your closing remarks.
Well, thank you so much. It's hard to go last when we've heard so much powerful testimony today. And what I'd just like to say, certainly Jenna has outlined a lot of the policy things that we heard and we will absolutely take back with us. One of the most powerful things that I heard today was hearing, the idea that you want your daughters to be able to grow up and be able to dream. And I just when I think about what you are all doing, and I also imagine that many of the people that are watching are really bravely putting themselves at risk, and after the trauma that many of you have been through, continuing to fight. I have to say that is incredibly inspirational, and I think this is what has triggered the globe and the demonstrations and the reactions around the world. Is that to see that kind of bravery in the face of that enormous repression is, and I don't even think inspiration is the right word, but it is something that makes all of us want to be able to fight alongside you. And that's something I want to leave you with, is that we are right here alongside you. There is solidarity here. You are not alone. And one of the things I've often said as a member of parliament is that I don't just have a voice. Jenna and I and others, we have a megaphone. And the wonderful thing about a megaphone is that you can take it and give it to somebody else. So whether it was the photo display inside Parliament, where images that were being blocked from internet were being displayed for all of the decision makers and legislators to see, whether it's events like this, whether it's demonstrations and vigils, these are all things that we want to be there right beside you, participating with you, listening to you, and working together in solidarity. I guess the one thing I want to leave you with is you're not alone. And the fight that you're fighting is a global battle. It is something that women and feminists around the world need to speak out for each other, need to stand up for each other, because we are all fighting the same very anti-democratic tendencies. So thank you. You said that we were going to keep the communication open. I firmly commit to doing that. And I firmly commit to helping to give you that megaphone so we can amplify all of your voices. Thank you so much for this evening.
Thank you, Anita. Thank you, everyone. That brings us to the end of our event. As we go back to our daily lives, we must continue to take a strong action to support the Iranian people in their fight against the Islamic regime's violence. We demand that the world not remain silent when this regime treats women as second-class citizens and kills, tortures, assassinates people on a daily basis. Iranian women and their allies are fighting for basic human rights, and all human rights activists should join in supporting them, not only to keep Iran safe, but also to safeguard the entire region and the world. It's important to note that the Iranian women's community is diverse and comprises individuals from various ethnic, religious, cultural background, and sexual orientations. We acknowledge that the brave women in marginalized communities across Iran, including the Arab, Kurd, Lur, Turk, Baluch, Baha'i, LGBTQ+, and disability communities have been systematically and historically targeted by the Islamic regime of oppression. Regarding that, I would like to share a short story about myself with you as well. While growing up in Iran, I experienced injustice and personal rebellion. However, compared to many women in Iran, I can say that I was a privileged woman. Coming from the capital, I didn't even know anything about the discrimination that others individuals, especially my friends and classmates and even neighbors, they were dealing with because of their religion, backgrounds, and sexual orientation. I was not aware of painful social repressions and discrimination that people with disabilities were, and even today still are experiencing in Iran. I only learned about social justice after moving to Sweden and later to Canada. However, 11 years ago, when I was in law school studying common law and French in Ottawa University, I was in a car accident, and that accident changed my life forever. Due to the severe car accident that I had and multiple concussion, I was not able to speak French anymore. So I couldn't study anymore. I couldn't type. My visual memory and mental multitasking ability were impaired. And I had to use wheelchair for a long time. Fortunately, again, I was privileged to be in a country like Canada. I was able to reapply, get into the English program because English was my fourth language, French was my fifth. And I received a scholarship to pursue my education and use services provided to students with disabilities. And with help of all those many good programs available and designed to people like me, finally I finished law school and passed the bar exam. And today here I am. Despite my limitation, I'm focusing on my abilities and trying to advocate for marginalized community, especially in Iran. As we mentioned earlier today, few times, I mentioned it and Jenna also mentioned it. Canada's theme for this year's International Women's Day is Every Woman Counts. And we are dedicated and united in our fight for a free Iran in which people from all diverse walks of life are free to be themselves. We would also like to acknowledge that the bravery of Iranian human rights lawyers and activists such as Nasrin Sotoudeh, Fatemeh Sepehri, Sepideh Gholian, and Narges Mohammadi, who are wrongfully imprisoned, and all of the courageous people who continue to put their lives at risk in the quest for freedom. On behalf of All for Iran team, I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to the panelists for accepting our invitation, for their valuable insight and thoughtful contribution to our discussion. Thanks to the audience for your time and attention, and big thanks to everyone who supported us in organizing and promoting this event. We would like to acknowledge the support of Iranian men who have fought shoulder to shoulder with the women and have been killed and arrested to pursue freedom. And we end this event with a short video in memory of the brave women and children of Iran who have been killed during the last 6 months since the beginning of Woman Life Freedom Movement. Let's remember, we are not free until everyone is free. Woman, life, freedom. Jen, Jian, Azadi. Thank you.
For dancing in the alleys and the streets, for the thrill and the fear of getting caught kissing, for my sister, my brother, and unity, for all the times we tried to change their minds and stale beliefs, for the loss of pride, for poverty, for the dream of just a normal life for you and me, for all the children who are starving for a loaf of bread, for the greed of politics and all the lies they spread, for all the mass polluted air we breathe, for all the litter in the streets and all the dying trees, for all the animals who suffer from elimination, for all the cats and dogs who love us without no conditions, for all the tears that seem to never end, for all the images that keep on turning in our heads, for a simple smile to last a little while, for the future generations fighting for their time, for empty promises of heaven in the afterlife, for all the imprisonment of beautiful minds, for all the babies who were born and for the ones who died, for all the times you told the truth and all the times you lied, for all the speeches that we heard about 1,000,000 times, for all the shacks and shelters that were sold to make a dime for just a glimpse of a peaceful life, for the rising of the sun after an endless night, for all the pills we pop just to get some sleep, for all mankind in our country, for all the boys and girls who never knew equality, for woman, for life, liberty, for liberty.